Welcome to Art of Wellness Unscripted, the podcast where we dive deep into holistic health, real conversations, and the journey to living your best, most vibrant life. I'm your host, Samara Tiller, and each week we'll explore the art and science of wellness with inspiring guests, expert insights, and the practical tips you can use every day. Today I have a new guest with us. His name is Jacob. I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jacob Diaz. Some people may know me by my IG name, Undercover Virologist. I kind of specialize, quote unquote, in germ theory, pseudoscientific destroying, if you will. That's how I started my whole career, really. And I'm a terrain-based naturopath, and we can get into what that means. It's a loaded term, but that's who I am, and I'm really excited to be here and just kind of talk about everything that I've learned over the course of like 6 years now.
Give us a little background on like what happened in your life to put you in this position where now you're in this career path.
Yeah, doing what I do. So basic background, I grew up in New York City, born and raised there. Didn't really care too much about holistic health for a while. I was always in tune with my body, always worked out, played sports, tried to eat healthy. And then during COVID, New York was the epicenter of everything. And just looking at just your objective analysis of what's going on, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't align with what the news is saying. People are dropping dead in Wuhan, left and right. You got to mask up. You got to do this, that, and the third. And we slowly saw, if you were just aware of what was going on, you slowly saw people's rights being taken away. Slowly. And people were just fearful. Fear, and I always say, fear is a toxin. Fear is a stressor. Stress creates disease. So you saw people being sick or paranoid of being sick. That would then lead to them getting sick because they were so fearful of something that at its root has never been shown to exist. So I would kind of delve deep a bit into podcasts like Alex Zeck's podcast and The Way Forward, Tom Cowan, Andrew Kaufman, all those people, Amanda Vollmer at the very beginning. Read their books. I think the first book was Contagion Myth by Thomas Cowan. That is what really blew my mind. And it always made sense to me. I am a believer in a God. I am Christian. So it never made sense as someone who believes in intelligent design that a loving creator would create things designed to kill you. It didn't make any sense. So reading how these things have been misinterpreted as such made perfect sense. And then I got into touch with Alex Zeck. We built a relationship. He's my friend. With a lot of other different terrain practitioners. We got homeopaths, chiropractors, medical doctors. We're in a chat together. The chat's been going strong for like 5 years now. And we just kind of just talk all the time. Hey, just what about this study? What about this study? What's your theory on this? And we just kind of built a relationship. We made the end of COVID. That was a big program that we were behind. About 120,000 people took part of it. So that was really cool. And that was really just a breakdown of everything from germ theory to virology to masking, everything. That was really cool, just being and connecting with all these people in the space. And then at a certain point, I was like, I'm learning so much. At that point, I'll probably doing it for like 2-3 years behind the scenes. Working with my other friend, Mike Stone of Virology. He does great work just exposing virology from their own actual studies. And I was like, I'm learning so much. Let me just make an Instagram. Let me just repost what I learn and make posts about, just explaining stuff. And it boomed. And it's a very niche topic. I didn't expect to have, I'm almost at 30,000, but people that just want to learn about this stuff. It's really cool. And then after a couple of years of that, I was like, what if I just make this my career? And my career path was, I wanted to go into law enforcement. And I was in law enforcement for a while. But I was like, I don't know. With COVID, you start to see that you can become a foot soldier of a system that you may not support. And am I willing to do that for my own? Like, I can't. I just can't do it. So I decided against it. And I just delved deep into this. I went to the Bigleson Academy of Holographic Blood. They are really a school in a sense. You don't get a degree or anything, but you are learning on the fly because they've been doing this stuff for 40 plus years. So they had us read books and do a bunch of stuff in their curriculum. I did a naturopathic course, an international one online. I went to my mentor, Dr. Mary, who's a naturopathic doctor, and I was like, should I just go to school for 4 years and just do the whole thing? She said, no. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. You already know a lot. It's been 6 years. Just do a course, get a certification, do that for a year or so, do something else, and then start your practice. And I was like, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to do that. So that's what I did. I've read 15, 20 different books in the span of 6 years. Sick of germ theory studies because I've become literate with them, just reading how virology works. And that I'm currently in 2025, almost 2026. I've had my practice for about a year. And what I kind of balance it out. I make content based on germ theory and understanding how health works, holistic health, specific diseases. And then on the side, people reach out, DMing me, and then I'll work with them. And I've been able to help a good amount of people with acute issues, with chronic issues, and help myself too. I'm in the best health state of my life, just applying everything I've learned. And now I just want to give it back to anyone that's listening, watching, wants to learn about anything terrain-based. This is what I want to do. So that's the story. Nothing crazy. It was slow. It was a slow burn for me, but I got there.
I love that. Could you start out by explaining to the listeners? I feel like I was talking about how I was going to have you on to one of my friends, and they didn't even understand what germ theory was. I was like, well, we got to back it all the way back.
Yes.
Can
Absolutely.
you explain the difference between the two?
Yeah, so the germ theory of disease was a hypothesis that was kind of hinted at for hundreds of years that really people didn't know what caused disease. Obviously now we know the main factors, but back in the day they were like, it could be demons, it could be little tiny bugs. They were still looking for something to blame. So when you look at the name germ, to germinate, germination, it's the beginning of life essentially. So really it's funny that they claim these tiny little particles that they call germs are pathogenic, but also simultaneously the beginning of life. So that's why they really call it germ theory, that, life comes from it, but they also take it away. It's a weird thing. So they essentially, it started really with Louis Pasteur. He built on some other works of other guys that I forgot the name of. I know them, but, it's a lot of people. So Louis Pasteur, he postured up the theory that germs, because they're found at the site of diseased tissue, they must be the cause. Obviously, logically speaking, that's ridiculous. By that logic, we go to a crime scene, you see a bunch of police officers, they were the ones that committed the crime, based on that theory. Or firefighters at a burned building, they're the ones that burned down the building. Or the flies at a garbage site, the flies are the reason the garbage is there. No. Association does not equal causation. We know that in the scientific terminology, but in germ theory, it doesn't mean anything. If they're there, they're the pathogens. So he did all this work. Specifically, he did work with silkworm disease, where he blamed tuberculosis and various fungal spores on silkworm disease and parasites. He did work with rabies, where he never actually isolated a rabies virus. What he would do was he would take rabid fluid of a dog that was obviously sick, and then inject a half cup full of it into the brain of another dog. And then the dog would die, and he's like, that rabies is a contagious disease. And it's funny because there was no control experiments. You didn't inject water into a dog. That's scientific. He was just taking crap and injecting it. And you can get people sick just by doing that. You can take mercury, you can take peanut butter, you can take anything and inject it into your blood. You will die. But he would do these experiments, again, for decades. Different experiments. And people just ate it up. And he would do stuff with vaccines where one group that he would label as an unvaccinated group actually got a shot that was highly toxic compared to a vaccinated group that got a shot that was attenuated, so it was a lot safer. So when the vaccinated group of cattle would die left and right, he would say, they're unvaccinated, because the vaccinated cows had something very different. So he was a fraudster. He made a fame and notoriety and fortune based off bastardizing science. He never actually purified bacteria and caused disease, nor did he ever find a virus. And this is the distinction with people that learn about what we're talking about with germ theory. Germs exist. No one denies this. Bacteria are germs. Fungus are germs. Helminth species that we would label as parasites, those are germs too. But they don't cause disease because he never actually showed causation. He showed association. When there is diseased tissue, these guys proliferate. Why? because their role in nature is to eat dead and dying tissue and then recycle it into nutrition for the body. And then doing that, your body takes that and detoxifies the waste via symptoms. They're not working against the body, it's actually an intelligent relationship. Whereas with viruses, these tiny little submicroscopic particles that are, some say 100 to 1,000 times smaller than a bacteria, have never actually been shown to exist in nature. You need to find it. And that's when we get into a debate with a lot of virologists or people that say, oh, I got COVID. What do you mean? We're not saying you didn't get sick with symptoms. We're saying that a tiny particulate that you can't find was not the cause of this disease. And then another guy built on a Louis Pasteur. His name was Robert Koch. They were contemporaries. He did work on tuberculosis and various other bacterial diseases and the same stuff. He would take fluid and disease crust and just inject it into bunny eyes or their brains or their lungs. And of course the animals will get sick. That doesn't mean anything. You need to isolate the germ. And in times where he would do that, he couldn't cause disease. So he made these postulates called Koch's postulates. Well, the very first postulate is very simple. You must find the germ only in sick people. You cannot find it in healthy people. Logically, that is sound. That makes sense. If you're claiming it's a pathogen, it should only be found in sick people. To date, he was never able to fulfill that first postulate. Never. He actually updated it. And then nowadays, people say, oh, Koch's postulates, they're obsolete. They don't matter. But when you look at them, it's very logical. You should only find it in unhealthy people. When you introduce it to a healthy organism, they should get sick. You should re-isolate it and then, culture it. All these things are logical, but they can't do it. So if they can't do it, what does that mean on the whole theory that it's proffered on? It's garbage. Germ theory was disproven for literally almost 200 plus years based on not only groups like the anti-contagionists, which was the actual foundation. People think that terrain is some new thing. No, there were anti-contagionist doctors that were very much against what Pasteur and Koch were doing. But Pasteur had a really good relationship with the crown, with, I believe it was Napoleon too. So, I mean, he had all the money. He had the backing of their congressional powers. So nobody was going to beat him. He would actually take research from a guy named Antoine Béchamp, who is very famous in the terrain space. He really founded the ideology of terrain, where he found that germs are actually, they're ubiquitous in the body. They live in the body, they multiply in the body, and to think that we are somehow, sterile in our blood, in our skin, in our tissues, is ridiculous. Because he would find these tiny little particulates that he called microzyma, which means small ferment in French. And these small ferments would become various different species of bacteria, of fungus, of specific even worms too. So he saw that as the terrain or the environment changed within the body, that these tiny particulates would become various bacterial or fungal species. So it wasn't that they were coming in and invading and pathogenesis was creating a disease. That's not what was happening. They were responding to a stressor within the environment. Logically, that makes so much more sense as we learn more now about the microbiome, about how our soil is literally riddled with germs, and how the more and more sterile we push our lives to be, the more sick we become. This fear of germs is really a fear of our own bodies. So Béchamp would show all these things to occur. Another guy later on, Gunther Enderlein, Claude Bernard, you had Gaston Naessens, you had Royal Raymond Rife. All these people saw the same stuff. Tiny little particles becoming various different forms of germs responding to the terrain. And that is really what terrain microbiology is all about. You support the germs, you don't fight them because they're doing a job. You have to support what they're doing. And when you do that, you heal quicker. Germ theory is this thing is going to kill you. It's all around you. Wear a mask, get a vaccine for something that literally lives inside of you, the germs. And, stay away from everybody because they're pathogens. But when you look at the actual studies and foundational research, you see that they falsified themselves. They never did control experiments. They never actually did what they claimed. And that's why it's so important. People want to debate me all the time. And they're like, well, if you want to debate me, read the studies first. They never do So it's like it's a waste because they're presupposing that what was the title of the study was actually done. And it never is. Literally, never.
Yeah, so I go to a naturopathic school in Michigan called the Naturopathic Institute for Therapies and Education in Mount Pleasant. And I remember when I started that program, there was a girl in my class. We all joined in on a group chat, so we talk every day, just like you and your group do. And she shared a document done about COVID and how the virus was never isolated. And that was like the first time that was really presented to me. And I'm like, what do you mean that was never isolated? Like, what are we doing? And then I learned how all the other ones were never isolated. And so I struggled, and I remember what a class exactly it was, but it's kind of like a basic class in the beginning of the program where they go over parasites, bacteria, and viruses. And when they started talking about the viruses, like my ADHD kicked in. I couldn't even focus because my intuition knew this is not right.
No, because it's funny. And I did a similar curriculum. I was vomiting throughout the whole thing about the virology. I was like, because this is trash. But when you listen to people talk about germs, worms, all that, it makes sense because they're actually there. So you can see them, you can manipulate them, you can grow them. We know it's there. With virology, the entire study is theoretical. Everything is a cartoon. It's a little. This little molecular strand and this thing and this little RNA and plasmid. It's like none of this is actually being seen. They're assuming based on an experiment they do with a cell culture. And if people with your podcast aren't aware of how they prove viruses exist, to put it simply, they get a cell culture. Usually, in most cases, it's a Vero E6 cell, so it's a monkey kidney cell. And then they take the sample of someone that they assume or presume is sick. So someone presenting flu-like symptoms, whatever, cold-like symptoms, they'll take the secretions from that. So it could be mucus, it could be poop, it could be urine, spit, whatever. And then they seed it on the cell culture. Right then and there, they are, again, assuming the virus is in the fluids without actually showing the virus in the fluid. And how they interpret this is via a PCR or an antibody test. PCR is not a detection, is not a diagnostic tool, it's a detection tool. But it cannot tell you that what it detects is actually there. It's just finding little tiny genetic fragments. And the whole idea of genetics too, that's another rabbit hole. Where there's a lot of assumptions there. No one's actually seen a nucleotide. If I always tell people, show me a nucleotide, show me a DNA strand. They don't. They can't. They literally can't do it. So what are we actually seeing in these computer programs? We're seeing a downstream effect of an experiment. So they affirmed their experiment based off the test. But how was the test shown to be adequate? It was never due. That's how they did it with PCR. So, and especially with COVID. So they do that, and then they have the cell culture there. Usually the cell culture in a laboratory setting, they give it around like 10% fetal bovine serum, which is cow blood, and that keeps the cell kind of alive. But when they do the virology experiments, they bring it down to 2% or 1%. So now the cell starts to get stressed and starts to die because it's not getting the nutrition. Add on the fluid that you just added that contains whatever it contains. It can have waste products, it can have blood, food, whatever. Sometimes they lightly filter it, and sometimes they don't. So the cell is automatically getting stressed out. And then they start to add their antibiotics, antimycotics. They add formalin, which is a formaldehyde solution. They add various growth stimulants. They add eosin, trypsin. They add all these enzyme eaters and various things. And of course, this tiny little cell is going to start to break down. So the cell starts to break down into tiny little particles. And they say, oh, see that right there? That's a virus. And when you look at, wait a second, you never showed that virus to be in the fluid of the person. You saw it at the end of your experimentation where the cell died. So how do you know this was the cause and not simply the effect? And that's really the conundrum of science, really, of virology. They never show it to be the cause. They see an effect, and then therefore, it's a circular reasoning. We saw a cytopathic effect, which is what that effect is. Therefore, viruses are real. But you can create cytopathic effects simply by starving a cell. So that association is not enough to make the claim. And that's why with COVID, I was telling people, read these studies, show me where they actually found the virus. And then at the end of that very experiment, what they'll do is they'll get the fluid of that culture. they will stain it with various chemicals, heavy metals, gold, silver, stuff like that. And then they'll freeze it, and then they'll heat it up, and then they'll freeze it again. They'll add more stains to it, and then they'll cut it into this tiny little resin that's like 1 millimeter thick. And then they'll take a picture with an electron micrograph, and then these tiny particles are there. They're stained, and they're not moving. Mind you, EM cannot see things that are living. It's literally just a photo of something dead. So they take a picture of it, and they're like, there's the viruses. It's really ridiculous when you start to think about it. You can't extrapolate anything from an electron micrograph, really, because everything has been ran through the ringer. It's like taking a pizza, putting it into your garbage disposal, running it through, putting it into a blender, adding cleaning solution, taking a picture of that, and then claiming that it's an intact pizza because you see cheese. It's ridiculous. Because that's what they're doing, and that's why it's so important to get to the root of their study and see how pseudoscientific it is. And for people listening, pseudoscience is something that does not adhere to the scientific method by definition. And by definition, for science, you need an independent variable, which is something that you can test, you can detect, you can manipulate. They don't have that in virology because, again, they're starting with a sample of someone that they presume is sick, and they don't see the virus in there. So there, again, it's assumptions. So it's actually, by definition, pseudoscientific. Whereas with germ theory, while there was logic behind seeing things at disease and claiming they may be the cause, it's been falsified. Therefore, now it's actually what we call a falsified hypothesis. So it's no longer a valid hypothesis. So believing in it, it's just fairy tale at this point. Virology, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I heard kind of like a way for someone to understand germ theory versus terrain theory is if you have a goldfish that's sick, are you going to medicate your goldfish and vaccinate it, or are you going to clean the tank and clean the water and treat the environment?
Yeah, exactly. And
yeah.
That's actually, that graphic was one of the first ones that I saw in 2019 or 2018. Mm-hmm. And I was like, this makes perfect sense. Like, when you just clean the environment, you're not going to need any of that stuff. And they did that. There is historical record of virtually all childhood/infectious diseases. You can think of smallpox, cholera, measles, you name it. When we cleaned the water, when we had adequate filtration systems, adequate waste disposal, adequate garbage disposal systems, we got rid of all the factories in the middle of urban areas, so getting rid of that pollution. Way before vaccine and antibiotics, all the diseases were essentially gone completely. And then, after a couple of years of that, they brought in the medical interventions. So now the medical interventions will take the credit for bringing down all the diseases, when in actuality, it was your environment. Cleaning out your environment, you get rid of you dumping poop in the streets, you get rid of the dying corpses all over your building. Guess what? You're not going to get sick. But back in the day, especially during the Industrial Revolution from the mid-1800s to the mid-1900s, it was a horrible time to live in urbanized areas. You were living in horrible living conditions. Your water was filled with literal poop. You were working ridiculous hours. The sanitation was non-existent. And people were dying left and right. Because, again, you're breathing in literal sewage. They used basements in buildings as bathrooms. And they didn't have bathrooms. So they would just poop in the basements. So when in the summertime, all that gas is coming up and it's heating up. So you're breathing all that in. So the water was contaminated. The food was really trash. There's like another rabbit hole you go into with raw dairy, where Pasteur, he pasteurized. The name of pasteurization comes from him. So when they brought the cows into the industrialized cities, they started feeding them runoff of distillery waste. They started feeding them cardboard and just food scraps, rotten stuff. And the cows would get sick. And in mammalian animals, when they have waste, it goes to where? The milk. So now you start drinking the milk, and then to fix that problem, they would add antibiotics to the milk. They would add chalk. They would add like thickeners, like these things, flour. So people start drinking it, and of course people get sick. They start dying. They get diarrhea. They get vomiting. That's not because of the raw milk that we've been drinking for thousands of years. Because if I go to ancient Israel or whatever, a Bible area, or Egypt, for instance, I drink that milk, I'm perfectly fine, because they're just eating what they're supposed to eat. Now they're being fed garbage and they're getting sick. You drink that, and then you check the poop and you see Listeria bacteria. Therefore, Listeria must be the cause instead of the poisoned milk. So if you take the actual Listeria and give it to someone and they don't get sick, what does that tell you? If everyone that's walking on this earth has Listeria bacteria in their gut, what does that tell you? It cannot be the cause of your food poisoning. It has to be another factor. And I do this with every post I do, especially specifically with bacterial posts. I look up the asymptomatic rate of every single germ. And it's amazing to see how the literature will say, oh yeah, this germ has a 85% asymptomatic rate. Meaning 85% of the time you have it and you're perfectly fine. Okay, so how does that prove it's a pathogen? So they did that with raw dairy. But when you take the cows out and put them back into the farmlands, what happens? Oh yeah, the milk is actually completely nourishing. But they ran with the pasteurization to the point where now everyone cannot process any sort of dairy because it's been nuked. They heat it up to a point where all the enzymes are gone, all the nutrition is gone, all the probiotic richness is gone. So now you're just drinking kind of just waste. And your body does not have the ability to accept the enzymes to digest lactose because they're gone, because you nuked it. So now everybody and their mother is drinking almond milk, is drinking all these different things, cashew milk, because they don't do milk well. Why is that? Maybe it's because we've been pasteurizing for 100 plus years, and even the pasteurized dairy, they inject the cows with hormones. So now you're getting that. And now you're getting fortified milk with fake vitamin D, which isn't even a vitamin, it's a hormone. So all these things are just slowly poisoning that food supply, all because of germ theory. It goes back to germ theory. That's all it is. And now we have a sterility problem with our food. Everything has to be sterile. You can't eat raw foods. You have to spray our vegetables and fruit with pesticides and glyphosate. And now our soil is depleted for microbes. And the microbes are the reason food becomes nutritious, because they allow the bioavailability of nutrition. So you get rid of that, now our food is devoid of nutrients. Why? Because of germ theory. It all literally goes back to the same garbage over and over again. Everything.
Have you heard of the work done by Dr. Hilda Clark?
Hilda? She's not Hilda from Weston A. Price?
I don't know about that one, but she's one that she was a naturopath, and every patient that came to her, she would keep track of, like, let's say they had hepatitis C, and then she would test them for parasites, and she'd keep all this data, and she noticed whenever someone had hepatitis, they had a parasite in the liver, but the reason they had that was because there was a toxin solvent that was polluting that liver. And so once they figured out the solvent, removed that from their environment, and then treated the parasites, they never had hepatitis C again.
Yeah. I did a post on hepatitis C a while back, and the foundational research is ridiculous. And in basically every single case of hep C, you had either profuse drinking or some sort of drug abuse where they're doing blood transfusion drugs. So they're injecting each other's blood, and they're injecting various isolated chemicals directly into their bloodstream. And of course, your liver is your mother detox, so it's going to take in everything you're giving it. So you would give it a bunch of isolated chemicals or alcohol. Of course, it's going to start breaking down. But then when it breaks down, what are you going to do? Oh, let's take an antiviral or an anti-inflammatory. That's not doing anything for you because your liver is breaking down. It's cirrhosis, essentially. And there was a really cool experience with Dr. Bigelsen when I talked about the Bigelsen Academy. He had a case of a woman who had positive hep C, and it had happened kind of out of the blue. And they checked her blood, and we can talk about this in a bit about what holographic blood is. But they saw inflammation in her uterus. And it was funny. They were like, okay, so what's going on here? Oh, she had recently put on birth control. So she's using birth control that is designed to create inflammation in the uterus. The inflammation is actually coming up. So now it's creating stagnation right above the uterus, right where the liver is. So now the liver started breaking down, and she went to an allopath, and they said, you have hepatitis C. But in actuality, she was dealing with some birth control inflammation. So they took it out at the clinic, or she actually took it out, and they rechecked her blood like a couple minutes after, and the inflammatory markers were all the way down because her body was now able to release that stagnation, and her hep C symptoms all dissipated. So it's funny how all of these, literally all of these diagnoses, and it's like when you look at what colds are, what flus are, what COVID is, RSV, it's all the same stuff. You have stuffy nose, you cough, you may have loss of taste and smell, fever, malaise. It's all the same thing in a different diagnosis, and depending on the diagnosis, they're going to give you a different drug. And the different drug has now different side effects, and different side effects will lead to different drugs. So it's a revolving door this pharmaceutical system has set up with these fake diagnoses. I personally, at this point, I don't believe in any of them. I will believe what the patient is telling me. How are you feeling? What do you think started this? Physically, emotionally, whatever. How is your environment? How is your diet? Okay, this is what I think is happening. It's not some disease or sickness your body has self-inflicted. It's all you. It's your environment. It's your actions. So with what she did, with what you're saying with Dr. Hilda, she saw the association with people's lifestyles and saw that, hey, there's a bug here that is always there in people's livers. Why is it there? You know, people say liver flukes, Hellman's species, and specifically in the alternative space, I'm sick and tired of people saying, oh, everything is a parasite. Oh, everything is this, mold and Lyme disease and what's the other one? Epstein-Barr, all these things. They're buzzwords. Why is the worm there? Everyone walking on this planet, every animal has worms in their stomach. They are designed to eat food that isn't being digested properly. This is why people with SIBO, with celiac, with all these poor digestive gastrointestinal disorders, they have worms. Not because the worms are causing disease, they're eating the food that you cannot process. So how about change your diet, lessen the amount of food you're giving the worms, and lo and behold, your symptoms go away because now your body can actually digest food. It doesn't have to rely on the worms eating the food. And usually, in most cases, when people have worms, they have some sort of heavy metal toxicity, where there's a lot of heavy metals in their gut or their neurological system. So the worms are attracted to that because it's highly toxic. Same thing with candida. Candida proliferation is almost always heavy metals. Almost always. So why am I blaming the candida that lives in our guts, that is literally part of a gut commensal microbiome, that is on my skin at all times? And why am I going to take an antifungal when I can just fix what I'm eating? It's really, like, I'd say 90% of your health is what you're ingesting. It's what your body is using. Does it identify it as food? Can it use it as food? Okay, now can it assimilate nutrition to self-heal? If you're not eating good food, you're going to be perpetually sick. And you're going to have all these chronic infections that the allopaths will say are autoimmunity. No, you're just stagnant. You were once a river, and now you're a river with a tree in the middle. You can't flow. So now everything starts to pop up, and you want to blame the little germs. And it's like, what are we doing? It's ridiculous. But yeah. So I completely agree with what Dr. What was her name? Hilda said.
Clark.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm assuming you're familiar with what Dr. Brian Ardis kind of brought to light.
Oh yeah.
The eyes roll.
Oh yeah. He looks. So with the end of COVID, I mentioned it. I did a lot of research from his stuff regarding remdesivir. He was exposing a lot of what the hospital protocols were doing with the remdesivir, with the steroid injections, with what the remdesivir did to people, shutting down their organs, leading to fluid coming up in the lungs. Like, he did great work on that front. And he also did great work publishing the side effects, the direct effects of the vaccines, and really looking at the data. I think he did it with a lawyer called, his name was Thomas Renz. And they looked at the healthcare data and insurance claims. And doing that, they were able to show how many people were dying post-shot. So I'm not poo-pooing Ardis on that front. He did great work with that, and I personally learned a lot from him on that front. The other side, he made one claim regarding snake oil, snake venom,
Snake venom. Mm-hmm.
Regarding COVID. And the only foundation he had on that claim was there was one study that did some sort of genetic analysis of...
From Italy.
Yes, from Italy. Mm-hmm. And the quote was literally, snake-like peptides. That's it. So it had proteins that were somehow similar, or in terms of how they looked structurally, were somehow similar to snake venom. So he ran with that and said, therefore, COVID is a snake venom that they're putting in our water, in spraying in our air, and whatever. And Dr. Andrew Kaufman did a really good video breaking down that study. And it's like, yeah, they did the same crap. They did cell cultures. They did all that. And they found these tiny little fragments of genetic material. And they said some of it may have been or may look like snake venom. It doesn't mean it was. They didn't say it was. They said snake-like. So it's a massive assumption he made regarding that. And then he was pushing a lot of they're putting snake venom in our water. And I'm not saying they're not putting crap in our water. I know they are. But that creates, again, a lot of fear when all you have is one quote of a snake-like peptide in one study out of Italy that was done really horribly. And then he had the other stuff recently. I mean, same guy like Peter McCullough did the same stuff where ivermectin is really helpful for COVID, and ivermectin is an anti-parasitic, therefore COVID is an anti-parasitic, or is a parasite. And they said the same thing with the malaria drug hydroxychloroquine, how malaria is a parasite disease, and since hydroxychloroquine works, therefore COVID is a parasite. Here's the problem. Both of those drugs primarily act as anti-inflammatories. So if you take an anti-inflammatory when you're sick and your symptoms stop, it doesn't mean anything. It just means you stopped your body from doing what it has to do. It just so happened that both of those drugs are marketed as parasite drugs. But you can do the same thing with ibuprofen, with Advil, with all these anti-inflammatories over the counters. You can have a flu, you can have a cold, whatever. You take that, your symptoms may lessen, your fever may lessen. Does it mean that, therefore, it's the cure to the disease, or is it preventing your body from releasing all that trash? And then there were other studies done after with ivermectin, with hydroxychloroquine, showing them to be highly ineffective for COVID. Well, what is COVID? It's like, what does that even mean? And potentially having downstream toxic effects. So you had the alternative space saying, take these two drugs, they are safer, but they are also drugs that have side effects. So why are we taking them as people that we are supposed to be naturopaths? We're supposed to be holistic. Why are we relying on pharmaceutical drugs? That by definition, and you would know this, at the very, very early, with, what was the guy's name? Not Ernst Rusk. I forgot the guy's name that founded naturopathy. I learned it and I forgot it. But his foundation was using nature. Like that, it's in our name, naturopath. You say the same thing with homeopathy. Homeopathy, you're supposed to use homeopathic solutions. You're not supposed to rely on drugs. TCM, Ayurveda, all these ancient modalities, they use herbs, they use nature, they use, infrared saunas, they use grounding, water, all these things. We're not supposed to rely on these drugs. So guys like that were trained as naturopaths or are framed as alternative practitioners, chiropractors, what's the other one? Functional medicine doctors, holistic doctors, and they're pushing pharmaceutical drugs. Run away, really, because they don't know the principles that we are literally supposed to follow. It's the ideology is just not there. So I saw that with artists, I saw that with McCullough, and then everything again, as I said, is a parasite. Everything from COVID to cancer to all these things are parasites. Now they're taking, I forgot the drug. It starts with a C. That they're marketing, and it's like it's another anti-parasitic, and people are taking it when they have cancer, and their cancers are going away in the short term. So again, it's an anti-inflammatory. Your body no longer is inflamed, so it's not releasing this disease. So now it's stopped, which is kind of good in the short term for you because you now are more comfortable, you can do stuff. But then now the cancer comes back stronger. Now your issues have gone more chronic because you prevented everything from coming out. So all these people, again, pushing these drugs as anti-this, anti-that. What are these drugs doing to your body downstream? They are preventing your body from releasing the trash. I always liken symptoms to being like a septic tank. You have a septic tank, you're supposed to pump it every 2 to 5 years, depending. And the septic tank is literally filled with waste. There's germs in there eating the waste, but at a certain point, it gets clogged up. It starts to come up, and your toilets do not flush properly. Think of your toilets as your lymphatic system. Your body is dumping garbage through the plumbing. And the septic tank is like your liver. But then, at a certain point, there's a lot of crap. So your body, or really your septic tank, needs to be pumped. But if it starts to overflow, and all you do is ignore it, or you put a bunch of bricks over it to prevent it from overflowing, what's going to happen in a couple weeks? It's going to explode. And all that waste is going everywhere, in your house, on your garden, wherever. And that disease is usually what we would call as cancer, where the tumors are everywhere because trash is now everywhere. It has not been processed. So all you did was suppress, and now your body is forced to rely on the most violent way to self-heal, which can also be very deadly, cancer. But it doesn't always start off as cancer. And again, I'm sure you would know this, and people listening, there's always signs. Your gut is garbage, your mood swings, your skin is kind of trash, your hormone is out of balance, and all you do are take antibiotics, you take synthetic hormones, you take all these cleanses, you're not getting to the root. You don't change your diet, you don't change your environment, you don't change your outlook, you don't change your emotional state, you're perpetually stressed. And then in a couple of years, you develop this chronic disease, you take more meds for that, and then you develop cancer in a couple of years. And then now what? You want to blame the cancer, you want to take a drug that says anti-cancer. Everything is anti. The body is not antagonistic, and that's the point. And that's really getting into, again, the germ theory ideology. It's seeded itself everywhere. Everything is fight nature. Fight your body. It doesn't work. We've been fighting our bodies for almost 200 years now. And that's really where the allopathic system started. And we're the sickest we've ever been. Ever. Everyone has a chronic disease. Every child has some sort of vaccine injury or cancer or autism, neurological issues. Every child cannot digest food properly. Like, where are we now? The proof is in the pudding. We've failed. The system it sucks. It's founded on the wrong premise. Why do we still follow this? And I see again with the alternative space and the health people, their intentions are good, but their ideology is the same. We got to fight this. We got to fight that. You got to do this detox for 55 phases. You got to take 55 different supplements. And your body isn't really using it because you didn't get to the root. It's so much. It's so much that I can say about these people that have, again, millions of followers. Like, they're really influential people. But when I see what they're saying, I'm like, no, this doesn't make any sense. I could go on. I could really go on.
So for the listeners, if you're saying, okay, viruses doesn't exist, then they're going to say, okay, well then explain COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So is it your opinion that it's like related to like what the book Invisible Rainbow talks about? It's all about the technology that's been released and these EMFs and radiation sickness and radiation poisoning?
That's a part of it, for sure. And I tell people listening, if you do want to do the end of COVID, which is still out there as a program, one of the very first episodes was the chronological order of how things transpired with COVID. And I would listen to that episode, I kid you not, 3 times a day for 2 months straight to get it in my head just how things started. And when you look at how things started, you had a couple dozen people in China get sick. That doesn't mean anything. It literally means absolutely nothing. People get sick all the time. I grew up in the most populated city in the world. Queens, New York City specifically, has people sick in the hundreds every single day. Does that mean there's a pandemic in Queens? Or does that mean people get sick? You had Wuhan, China, one of the highest densest populations in China, have a couple dozen people get sick, and now people were just dropping dead left and right on the streets? That doesn't make any sense. So at first, when the reports came out, you had people claiming that I think at this point it was 7 people that were sick at a hospital in Wuhan, and then it became 42, I want to say, and they had symptoms that were consistent of pneumonia. Okay, what are pneumonia symptoms? You're coughing, you may have flu-like pains and fever, you may have bilateral pneumonia, some mucus coming out. Okay. Doesn't mean anything because Wuhan is one of the more polluted cities on Earth. It's literally one of the most polluted cities on Earth. The air quality is trash. And people wear masks all the time. So people coughing up phlegm is pretty common. But they assumed, off of that small group, that it must be SARS-CoV. Why? Because there was one doctor in the hospital that said these symptoms are consistent with SARS-like disease. SARS-like. So then he posted it on a WhatsApp chat that there's a SARS outbreak in China. That went everywhere in the news, everywhere in the intermediate medical communities. And then a guy named Corman, or no, his name was Drosten. His friend was named Corman, or he might have been named Corman Drosten, whatever. He was a pathologist, a epidemiologist, virologist, whatever. And he saw this report, and he said, okay, there's a SARS-like virus in Wuhan. Let me make a test for it. And when you read the study that he published, this was late 2019, so literally like the 2-3 weeks after the reports out of Wuhan, he made a PCR test, which is funny. Again, we said it's not a test, it's a detection tool. So he made this tool, and in his study he says, quote, this PCR test was made without clinical samples or without a clinical isolated virus, end quote. So you don't have a sample from someone that was sick, and you don't have the virus, yet you're making a test? How does that work? And when you look at how he did it, he relied on the same genetic data from SARS-CoV-1 that was all done the same way. Cell cultures, bat spit, bat poop being injected into cultures, all these things. So he took that data, and then he waited until they did genetic analysis of the people in Wuhan, and then sent out the test that was most identical to what they published. So he actually initially created 3 different PCR tests, all with different results. And then he waited for the genetic publishing and then said, okay, this one is most similar, but it turned out the genetic analysis from the one person in Wuhan, it was only 80% similar to SARS-CoV-1. So to put that in perspective, in terms of genetic analysis, humans are around 99% similar to apes or gorillas. But obviously, we are not monkeys. We are around 90 or so, maybe a little less, to house cats. So we obviously aren't house cats. So that shows you the genetic disparity between what they had in Wuhan and what they were claiming was like species different. But they still ran with it. And then this test starts to being sent in New York. It starts to be sent in London, to Beijing, to all these crazy different cities with massive populations. And people start testing positive left and right because it is so sensitive. These detection tools can be manipulated so easily. And then you have a high cycle threshold, which you're running a cycle 30 times, 40 times, 50 times. You're going to get positives left and right. When Fauci himself at the beginning of COVID said anything over a 25 cycle threshold is not a positive diagnosis. He said it himself. But everybody was doing 30, 40, 50. People were testing positive left and right. And then when you look at the symptoms of, again, the couple dozen cases in Wuhan and Beijing and China, really, which has a population of over 1 billion people, it was cold, pneumonia-like symptoms. Nothing out of the ordinary. There was nothing going on. And then you had one guy travel to the United States that he was from China, tested positive even though he was perfectly fine. And then you had a pandemic simply of testing. So what I tell people, when you look at what actually happened in the very beginning, nothing was happening. COVID was nothing. What then happened and coincided with COVID was, as you said, there was new EMF technology in the form of 5G. Where was 5G first installed? Wuhan, China. It was about a month or so before the cases of people getting sick. Does EMF cause disease? 1,000%. I made just a reel about it and about how to protect yourself from EMF. There's been studies since the 70s on toxicities of EMF. You mentioned the invisible rainbow. Every single time we upgrade the non-native EMF around people, it coincides with people getting sick. The first cases of chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia were actually cases that lived nearby railroad lines. So that's really interesting. Like, what are we doing with our bodies and the tissues and our pain simply by being near something like that? You had the telegraph lines during the Spanish flu. You had, again, 4G, 5G coinciding with, I believe, some sort of fever in China, and then SARS-CoV-1. You had cases of like the meteors and some cosmic radiation coinciding with the Black Plague and all these things. And of course, with COVID, you have the 5G. So am I saying COVID was 5G? No. But some cases did look very clearly like they were radiated. Like when you look at the symptoms of people that go through chemo, they lose their taste and smell, and they lose their hair. There were people losing their hair and losing their taste and smell. But you also had cases in 1989 out of Los Angeles of people going through regular influenza and losing their taste and smell. Growing up, I didn't have the greatest health. I was vaccine injured. I had a lot of respiratory issues. I remember losing my taste and smell multiple times as a kid. But again, this was early 90s, thousands, and it's like, okay, this was normal for me. It's not like a big deal. But we're told in 2019, 2020, if you lose your taste and smell and you're sick, it's COVID. Okay, but what about the flu and pneumonia and colds? Like, what happened there? Oh, it's different. How is it different? Well, what are the symptoms? It's exactly the same. So, does radiation deplete minerals from your tissues, leading to loss of taste and smell? Absolutely. When you look at the epicenters of COVID, they all had higher rates of poison earth and cyanide poisoning in the atmosphere. Does that play a role? Yes. Air pollution. You're breathing garbage, so people are going to get sick. So you add on the EMF, you add on the garbage of spraying stuff in the skies and the chemicals in the air. You add on the fear, the constant fear pushing by the news. I remember, and you remember as well, the CNN clock right on the bottom where it was counting the deaths. And I'm like, how do you know? Like, how do we know that this is legit? It just keeps going up and up and up and up and up. So that instills in you a fear. Like, oh my God, like I'm going to die. That in itself is enough to get diseased. And then say you have cold-like symptoms, flu-like symptoms, hell, allergies. Because look at allergies, very similar to colds because they're really the same disease. That's another thing. You go to the hospital, they test you, it's positive. Okay, now what? Let's give you remdesivir, which is going to shut down your organs. It's going to shut down your liver and your kidneys. Your lungs are going to be filled up with fluid. And then when you start to drown in your own fluid, we're going to put you on a ventilator, which is going to pop your lungs, and then you die. And then we're going to call it COVID. And then we're going to make hundreds of thousands of dollars off of you because that's what the insurance were doing. They were giving hospitals insurance incentives for COVID patients and COVID deaths. So they actually had a reason to kill you in a hospital. And I'm not saying the hospitals themselves were wanting to kill you. The people that made the protocols, they wanted to kill you. And those are the Faucis. Those are the higher ups in the CDCs and the World Health Organizations. They did the studies with Ebola and remdesivir, and 50% of people that took remdesivir died. And they okayed that to give it to people for COVID. And what are the symptoms of COVID? Again, you have sniffles, malaise, maybe fever, dry cough, wet cough. Okay? 80% of cases were asymptomatic, meaning people were completely fine. So what was COVID? It was a lot of different things. It was an umbrella that they created of different symptoms that they validated as COVID with a crappy test that isn't even a test. What did antibodies mean? Oh, it meant that you were sick, but it also meant you were immune. But it also meant you were actively infected. But it also meant you weren't sick. Like, what? The contradictory statements from all these different agencies. It was like, what are we doing? And then the masking, too. That creates a problem. One of the episodes I personally did in the end of COVID was the masking. Me and my friend, Dr. Mary, we went through 90 different studies that were published around the COVID era, before the COVID era, post-COVID, that all showed, just simply based on virology theology, pretend viruses exist. Masks are not enough to stop transmission. Just pretend they exist. They can't stop it. But we know they don't exist. So what are you now doing to your body based on something that isn't there? You are literally preventing your body from breathing, from respirating. Respiration is not only how your body gets rid of waste, it also accepts literally life-giving force, whether it's oxygen, whether it's free energy. You know, I'm now currently in the point where I personally believe that it's more electricity that runs our body rather than oxygen or whatever the case is. We are running off of charge. And when you look at TCM and Ayurveda, chi, which is energy, you breathe in chi, you breathe in charge. So by doing this, you are lessening your charge. You are lessening your life force. Yeah.
Yes.
On top of that, you're also breathing in your waste. So now all that waste is accumulating. It creates a wet environment. Bacteria come in because they're like, whoa, what is going on here? Let's start eating this crap up. And now you start developing a sore throat. You got strep throat. You got cold symptoms, whatever, because of the masking. With the Spanish flu, I did a really deep dive on Spanish flu. There were a lot of different factors. There was obviously the telegraph lines, but it was primarily the vaccines that were given to military personnel in I believe it was in Missouri or Arkansas. There were different bases. They were giving Marines and U.S. Army soldiers like 20 or 30 different vaccines, and they were all getting sick in America. But they wanted to blame the Spanish. It was like, what are we doing? And these soldiers weren't even going out in war. They were sick in America after their shots. But since World War I ended a lot more abruptly than they expected, they then marketed all of these vaccines to the population. So now everybody and their mother was getting 20 or 30 different shots, and people were dying left and right. And there's a really good book called The Poison Needle by Eleanor McBean, where her and her family, they were treating people in different homes during the Spanish flu, and they never got sick. And in her opinion, she said the families that were getting vaccines were the ones that were dying left and right, but the ones that didn't were not sick. And then during the Spanish flu, you also had people wearing masks. A lot of them. And they were a lot more thicker back then, too. It was like wearing like a dress over your mouth. So people were dying from pneumonia, from all these breathing issues, because they couldn't breathe. And then they were going to the hospital. They were given heroin. Because back in the day, they were just giving straight up hard drugs. Cocaine, heroin. You had, what was the other one? The aspirin wars back then, where they were popping aspirin like mints. So, of course, people started dying left and right, and they want to blame the Spanish flu. But the Rosenau experiments of 1918 showed that contagion was impossible. People that were sick with the Spanish flu could not pass disease. So how is it a flu? And then they took, secretions, injected it, gave it to people, and no one got sick. So is it a pathogen? Is it a contagious disease? Or is it a constitutional malady that we are causing people by poisoning? And that is what terrain is. It's constitutional maladies that can proliferate, whether from emotional stressors, physical stressors, poor diet, or a really bad environment. And your body has no choice but to release the trash. And again, the allopathic system will frame it as an infectious disease, when in actuality, it's just your body doing exactly what it needs to do.
Well, that's a great way to explain it for the listeners. Yeah. I'm curious what your thoughts are on related to things that numerous doctors have found in the COVID vaccine in the vials.
So that's oh my god. All right, so I did mention I was going to talk about the holographic blood, which I will. But to preface this, before I even say this stuff, I am not saying the COVID vaccines were not deadly. It is of my opinion, these were the most deadly shots in history. Very clearly they were. You look at, not only they've done peer-reviewed data now regarding vaccinated populations all having spikes of basically every single disease you can think of. Mm-hmm. Anecdotally speaking, we never saw people drop dead really 2019, 2020. We saw it late 2020, early 2021, and 2022. People were dying left and right. Healthy people in their 20s, in their 30s, and their 40s, developing turbo cancers, just literally organ failure, strokes, heart attacks, you name it, they got it. Athletes were dropping dead. It was insane. So when I say what I'm about to say, these shots clearly contained stuff. There were studies done by a team, I forgot their agency name. They were out of Spain. La Quinta Columna, yes. Yeah, Colombia, my bad, yeah. They did studies where they looked at the vials and they found ridiculous amounts of different heavy metals, specifically graphene. And graphene is a high conductor. And when we talked about right now with charge, what are these heavy metals doing to our charge? They are attracted to electricity. So them seating themselves in the heart or the nervous systems or the brain, since they're attracted, of course, you're going to have all these pathologies for the neurological system. That was like obvious. That said, there were other people that were looking at the vials with dark field microscopy, and finding these weird looking structures. Now, can some of those structures definitely be heavy metals? For sure. But knowing what I know now on dark field and how it's supposed to be, it's very likely what they were looking at in those dark field microscopy studies were artifacts, complete artifacts, not actually there, and potentially just salt crystals. The reason I say this is the Bigelsen Academy, which I went to that was made by Dr. Harvey Bigelsen. Currently, his sons, Josh and Adam Bigelsen, they teach it. With dark field, you can see a lot of things, like a lot of scary things, really cool things. It's really one of the only ways you can see living tissue. With dark field, you can look at the blood without staining it. So you can look at the structure of the red blood cells, the white blood cells, the platelets, the microzymas, which I mentioned in the beginning, the tiny little particles that become different germs. They outnumber the cells like 10 to 1. So we really are more germ than we are actual blood cell. And in these micrographs, they designed, which is based off traditional German microscopy, they were able to see different, energetic imprints of disease and pathology in the blood. So I don't know, are you familiar with Veda Austin and her work with water? Yeah. So that's really cool. And it's based on Masaru Emoto's work, where he did the same thing, where he saw structures of water change, and she was doing the same stuff. In the blood is primarily water. Molecularly speaking, we are 99% water. By weight, we are 70% water. But you go down to the minute details of our body, pretty much everything is structured water. Easy water. It's a gel-like water that it's created when it hits a hydrophilic surface. So our tissues, blood, lymph, everything is essentially just different forms of water. This water acts as both a conductor of energy, but also an interpreter of energy. So we see that with Veda Austin. Different words will make different images of water. In the blood, you see those same images. You see, someone comes and they have poor digestion, a lot of anger, potentially they are a heavy drinker. We check the blood. Not only are we going to see physical degeneration of the blood, we're going to see some platelets that are indicating inflammation. We might see some white blood cells indicating your body's actually trying to do something here. You may have some structures of blood look kind of wacky. You're going to likely see a hologram of a liver, which is an image, a literal energetic image of the organ. I have literally at this point like 100 plus pictures of different holograms in different blood samples. And I can show you after the episode. What they do with the blood is they look at these holograms and they're like, okay, this right here looks identical to the liver. Based on your pathology, you told us you're having poor elimination, you have a lot of anger, which is linked to liver health. We think this is a liver. We're going to have you do some body work with your liver, decongest it, maybe some milk thistle, maybe some isopathics to help, some homeopathy. Come back in a couple weeks. Lo and behold, they recheck. Your liver's good. There's no liver in the blood. The reason I'm mentioning this is in a lot of these vials and in the blood of people that got the shots, what they were seeing were holograms. A lot of it were energetic imprints of what was wrong with them. It wasn't parasites. It wasn't some massive structures, because logically, these structures that they were finding in the blood of people that took the shots, they were massive. They were huge compared to the size of a blood cell. If that were there, you would have stroked out immediately. Your circulation would have stopped. It's like that cannot be in the blood in a living person. So it can't be something literally physically there. It has to be something energetic your body is now creating to then basically image to you what's going on. And at the very beginning, in the end of COVID, I actually interviewed was it Anna, Dr. Anna something? She did the live.
Starts with the M.
Yes.
Her last name. Yes.
Her.
I just went down a rabbit hole yesterday on her stuff.
So I interviewed her.
Yeah.
And I was looking into at first. This was before I did the holographic blood stuff, and I was like, man, this is insane. Oh my god, these shots. Oh yada yada yada. And then I went to the Biggleton Academy. I was like, wait a second, this is just hologram. These aren't real. And again, that's why I prefaced it. I'm not saying these shots didn't contain heavy metals. They didn't contain, stuff they made in labs, whether genetic or not, genetic fragments of whatever. Of course, inject that into your blood, you're gonna get sick. But what they were claiming was these shots contained mycoplasma, parasites, all these different things, and these huge crystals could have been graphene. It's like, no, I'm at the point now where that's just BS. And the reason that is not to be appealing to authority, but what these guys taught me about dark field, they've been doing it for 4 decades. It's very easy to misinterpret things when you don't know what you're actually looking at. And in her case, she had not a lot of experience using dark field. So they did the same stuff she did and were like, yeah, all this stuff, that's a salt crystal, that's a dust particle, that's just simply taking blood wrong. Like for instance, if you take a drop of blood and you put it on a slide and you smash the slide, that degenerates the structure of the blood cells. So now when you look at the blood, all the cells are going to look really, really sick and mushed up. And now when you look at it, a naturopath will be like, oh my God, you have, lupus or some sort of circulatory disease. When in actuality, it's actually just you took the blood wrong. So now the blood looks sicker than it actually did. So just all these different nuances and how to take blood, how to look at it using dark field, they didn't take that into account. So they were making all these claims based on how the blood looked, and it wasn't actually valid. It was just fear. And I had dozens and dozens of DMs every week. Oh my God, my husband got the shot. I just saw what they have in the shots. What can I do? And I'm like, listen, the body can handle a lot of toxicity. Maybe ideally, eat well for a while, go to a sauna every other day. But I don't think you're going to drop dead if you're keeping, your health intact. The people that were dropping dead were people that didn't really care about their health, I would say. They were neglecting their health. I'm not saying healthy people didn't get sick. Of course they did with the shots. But a lot of fear. Like, if you're constantly fearful, you will eventually, inevitably fall victim to your disease. And I don't push fear. That's not what I do. That's probably why I don't make a lot of money. Because it's not, the fear does not work. But it works for advertising. So you get, oh my God, we found this in your shot. Take this drug and take this protocol we made. Take this, take that. It's like, no, none of it was actually there. Let's look at your blood, and the message in the blood will be enough for us to treat you. We don't need all these drugs. So yeah, I don't buy into what they were seeing. I understand they had. I'm not saying they were nefarious. They actually had good intentions. There were valid studies done with what they found in terms of heavy metals and stuff, but that's about it. There also was no spike protein either, because in order to have a spike protein, you need a virus, and they never had a virus. What they had was a recombinant protein that they made in a lab, essentially made out of garbage. Actually before the shot, the Pfizer executive said, or was it Pfizer or the other one, Moderna? I forget which one it was. They said, we synthesized the spike protein without the spike protein, without an isolated virus. So how can you synthesize a virus protein without having the virus? Like, how does that work? Doesn't make any sense. So they make it in a lab and they put that into a shot. And we don't know what the heck that thing does in the body. Does the mRNA dissipate instantly? Does it, become one with your genetic material? We still don't know. There were a lot of people making a lot of claims about how mRNA is going to seed into your genetic code and is going to kill you, and that's how it's going to. And I'm like, well, how was DNA discovered? It really wasn't. It was a lot of assumptions, a lot of chemical reactions. How do we know the mRNA is actually there? Oh, because we encoded this and that. Okay, show me the mRNA. Here's a cartoon. Okay, so it's a cartoon. It's a graph. Can I see it? It's not there. So there were a lot of assumptions in the alternative space of mRNA doing this to your body. Am I a fan of injecting stuff into your blood? Hell no. I don't care if you think it's a virus, if you think it's a gene, mRNA. Just don't inject it, because your body is not really meant to be injected into, whatever it is. Now, in some cases, there may be some benefits to injecting certain stuff to keep people alive, but in most cases, you don't need any of that crap in your blood. Like, if God wanted us to inject stuff into your blood, he would have put holes in our blood to inject stuff into. But he didn't. Like, our skin is an organ. It absorbs everything, and all that goes into your blood too. So that's enough right then and there. We don't need to add another burden into our bloodstream, which is our life force, by injecting crap into it. So yeah, no, it's a bunch of trash. Honestly, there's a lot of trash in both spaces. It's a lot of fear, but yeah, that's my opinion on it.
This is good timing because I'm actually starting a live blood analysis class on Monday.
Okay. So yeah, keep in mind there's going to be a lot of stuff that are right and a lot of stuff that are wrong. Please do that holographic blood analysis course. It'll blow your mind. And these guys are veterans. They know what they're doing. They do a school, I think, twice a year. They have 2 books, which anyone listening, the 2 books are Holographic Blood and Doctors Are More Harmful Than Germs. Those 2 books, I blew my head wide open on everything. Everything started making sense. And both of their courses are based on each of those books. So if you can do that after your live blood, whatever, definitely it's insane.
Well, I have to now.
Yeah. But there's a lot of stuff that I during COVID I was just not agreeing with, and now knowing what we know now, it's like a lot of it was fear. A lot of it was unfounded and opinionated, and people eat it up because they have nothing to believe in. They just believe in everything because they're like, oh, what do I believe? And it's hard. Like, there's a lot of conflicting information, especially like with things like diet. Like, meat is good, but now it causes heart disease. And raw milk is good, but now you're going to die. Oh, veggies are good, but now it causes leaky gut. Like, you can't believe in anything at this point. Like, it's intuition that people need to listen to. Get back to how the natives, how the ancients lived. They knew what to eat, how to eat it. They prepared it well. They were always grounding. They had intention with their nutrition. They lived off the earth. Now, obviously, in modern days, we can't live off the earth like they did, but try your best. Do your best to limit toxicity, eat well. And, if your body says, hey, I don't really like this food, then don't eat it. Don't force it. That's fine. I love an animal-based, kind of carnivore-like diet. I do eat a lot of fruit, and I love it. And I love a lot of raw milk. I don't eat a lot of vegetables. I eat a lot of fermented vegetables. Why? Because that works for me. But I see other people, they thrive off vegetables, and they don't eat red meat. Okay, that's fine. I'm not going to say what you're doing is bad. But if you get sick after what you eat, then you have to make a switch. You have to make a change. And that's all intuition. Listening to the messages your body is giving you, what your biofield is telling you. Your biofield is not only your body, it's the charge, it's the energy you give off. Everyone has a 6-foot biofield that your heart creates based off your electrical waves. And that creates whether you want to say your soul, your emotions, your traumas. Eileen McCusick did really cool work on biotuning, how she was able, like over here, be like 10 feet away from somebody, sense that there was trauma. And that's because their biofield was holding that in. When you go into a room and you feel like the vibes are off, something happened. Oh, your significant other, like, what happened? What's wrong? You feel it. That's all energy. That's electricity, really. And all of that is going to tell your body, hey, I don't like this. Don't do it. But we've lost that. We have lost the ability to tune to that. I think likely because of the non-native EMFs that are sending in so many different electrical signals that we can't interpret anything because we're inundated with toxicity. Our livers are garbage, or you trust your gut. You can't trust it now because your guts are garbage. You have the non-native EMFs. You have the Wi-Fi pulsating constantly. You have the working of 45 plus hours a week. Nobody can afford anything now. You're perpetually stressed. Like, yeah, we are now purposely being put away from that instinctual ability to tune into our bodies. Now everyone just relies on synthetic life. Nobody grounds anymore. It's like that's the freest medicine you can get. The sun, free medicine. We're told it causes skin cancer. Oh, now everyone has skin cancer because they're not going out in the sun. It's like we lost sight of everything that nature is designed to give you because we rely on everything humans made. And now what? Like, yeah. So.
Well, if I had more time, I would keep talking. We have to have you come back on after
absolutely.
this class because I'll have way more questions for you after that. I know.
I'm always down to answer questions. That's like what I do now for like a living. So answer questions.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to do this podcast, and we'll Talk soon.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Bye.